Everybody want to go ahead and turn to Joshua chapter 9. As far as sick are concerned, for the most part, everybody's kind of where they were. I have some good news. The young lady that we've been asking you to remember in your prayers, Olivia Carson, she's the young lady with Ewing sarcoma, the friend of ours in Texas. They did surgery on her. And we misunderstood what was going to happen. We thought, at least I was told, that they were going to have to basically amputate her arm to the elbow and they were going to be able to keep her elbow. That was not the case. Her entire arm was able to be saved. Okay, what the issue was, they were going to have to take out this bone right here, and they were worried they'd have to take out this elbow. Okay, they didn't. They were able to keep the entire arm, and they put in an implant from her shoulder to her elbow. So basically her whole arm is going to be okay, except for that one part that they had to replace. So way better than I was thinking. I thought that they were going to have to basically take her arm up to the elbow and then she would have a prosthesis. That's not the case. So all is well, and as well as they've seen that a definite shrinkage in the growths in the tumor, and in some of the nodules they're showing definite signs of decrease. So a lot of prayers have gone up for this 15-year-old young lady, and prayers are being answered. So please continue to remember Olivia Carson in your prayers. They still got a ways to go. She still has a lot more therapy to go before they can say she's out, she's in the clear. But right now, everything really looks good for her. So thank you so much for your prayers on her behalf. We ask that you please remember Janice Harbin. She is at the Pruitt Center over on Mulkey Road. And she is there for, she seemed to think about 2 months. She was going to stay there as long as she needed to in order to get better. She realized, when I was talking to her, she realized that she had been going home too early. She can't take care of herself at home right now, so she's going to stay there for the necessary amount of time. So please remember her in your prayers. Dad's his foot had been bothering him. And he got out yesterday and was helping us, and just worked it too much, moved around too much on it. And now he's just not able to be here today. So hopefully he'll feel better and be back with us on Wednesday. But as of today, he's going to stay home. Let's see. Anybody else that we need to remember as far as sick is concerned? Let's see. And this is something. This actually kind of brings up something that I was. We would in talking with Lynn. I don't know exactly anything that's going on with her specifically right now. I know that getting around is just difficult for her. But when in speaking to Lynn, what they asked, she called Heather and asked her about 2 months ago. No, I'm sorry, about a month ago. In order for her to go back home, she just needs people to kind of keep an eye on her. And she asked if there was anyone here who could possibly help out by checking in on her on Mondays and Wednesdays. What that means is basically go by the house, make sure that she's up and that she's taking her medication and that she's just kind of up for the day and she's not laying in bed. So if you can help out with that, she said Monday and Wednesday. I have no problem going by on Wednesday because I'm always over here at the building anyway, regardless, on Wednesdays. So I'll go by on Wednesdays. But if there's someone here who can go by on Mondays, just to go by, knock on the door, make sure she's up, ask her if she's taking her medication, for about 10 minutes, and then that's it. So if you can help out with that, let me know. I've got a key. Actually, I've got 2 keys. So, if somebody can help out doing that, you can have a key, or I can leave one here. So if you're going to, you can grab it on Wednesday or Sunday afternoon or whatever. But anyway, I'm going to go by on Wednesdays, and she said it would just make a big difference. For one thing, she gets a little bit of interaction with people, and that's going to be a big difference as well for her. So, Millie, you want to go by on Mondays?
No. Hey, don't put me in that spot.
Okay. Hey, you're going to ask a question, I'm going to get you.
Okay.
Anyway, if you can help, let me know, and I'll put you onto that. I don't know if there's anybody else that we need to remember as far as sick is concerned. I think everybody's is doing okay as far as I know. Let's see. Yes, ma'am. Okay. Okay. All right. Need to remember Miss Gale. She's going back to the doctor tomorrow for some lung issues. Hopefully, going back for tests. Okay. All right. So pray for tests tomorrow for Miss Gale. Hopefully, there's no signs of any kind of serious issue, though. That's what we're hoping for. Absolutely. Okay. So remember Miss Gale. There's one, and I know I'll remember here in about 10 minutes, and I'll say it then. She's doing okay. She's just, it's just going to be a long slog for her to regain her strength. Her upper body strength was almost non-existent. She was not, when she was at Kennestone, which is kind of unusual, they did not get her out of bed the entire time she was there. So she was not being exercised. So she just lost her upper body strength. Now, once she's up and she's moving, she can get going. She goes up and down the hallway and walks, and they move her legs, and she's fine as far as that's concerned. Everything else is good, but just the ability to pull up or push up is just not there. So when she sits down, she's pretty much there until one of her sons is able to help her get up and go. But hopefully within the next couple of weeks, she'll start to regain that. It's just once you lose that, it takes forever to get it back. So please remember her in your prayers. Thank you. Anybody else? Anything else? Okay. Happy birthday to Miss Sybil. 95 years old today. Today's her birthday. That's great. I'm hoping for 95. People stand me that long. Eventually. All right, that's all I got. All right, let's go ahead and have prayer. Father in heaven, we're thankful for the day, and we're grateful, Lord, that you brought us to this place this morning. We're thankful, Lord, for what you do for us. We're thankful that you care for us, that you love us, and that you want what's best for us. We're grateful, Lord, for the prayers that have been answered for many who have been sick and ill, and we're grateful, Lord, that they have regained their health to the point that they are now. We ask that you continue to be with them, and Lord, if it's possible for you to bring them back to us again. Be with those who have lost loved ones recently, Lord, and we ask that you comfort them. We ask that you be with the Kaufman family and the loss of their loved one, and we pray, Lord, that your blessings are upon them. Be with those who are traveling, those who are on the roads and away from us, and we pray, Lord, your blessings on them. Get them safely to where they're going and back to us again. We're thankful for the congregation here at Central. We're thankful for what we mean to one another. We're thankful for the family that exists here. We pray, Lord, your blessings on us. Be with us as we go through our study. Help us to understand better from your word what you would have us do in our own lives. Continue to provide for us. Continue to watch out for us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Oh, that's it. Tanis and Dan. That was the one I was trying to remember. Dan, Dan had issues last week. That's why they weren't here. Excuse me. We'll do this again today. They had taken him to the hospital, and they had released him. It seemed like everything was going to be fine, but she ended up having to go back to the hospital with him in an ambulance. They couldn't figure out what was going on. He just had these massive these headaches that the medicine wasn't touching, and they took him to the emergency room, and they kept him overnight. But they did an MRI and a CAT scan, and they cannot find anything wrong with, nothing is pressing on the brain. They can't find anything that shows up as some kind of an issue. So they're trying to figure out what's going on. She has some a little bit stronger medication, and but they released him yesterday. He went home, but they don't know what's going on. He seems to be feeling a little bit better, but the headaches are kind of a cause for concern. And I told her, I said, this reminds me of a lot when I got severely dehydrated one time. And I asked her if they gave him fluids while he was in the ER, and she said no. And the problem is, if you're dehydrated to that point, drinking fluids doesn't help anymore. You can drink as much as you want, and you're going to get hydrosis. The fluids need to be pumped back into the body through the IV. So I told her, I said, you might want to think about taking him back up there and insisting that they give him some fluid. because everything that he talked about just sounded so much like severe dehydration, not just I need a little bit of water, like severe dehydration. So, but we talked for about 10 minutes yesterday, and she said she would let me know what's going on. But he's at home, he's feeling much better, but they don't know what's going to happen as far as having to go back and have any further tests. But they did determine that he hadn't had a stroke. There's no they didn't see anything like possible like spinal meningitis, because that's some of the symptoms that present there. Anyway, but please remember Dan and Tanis in your prayers as well. So, all right, so remember those folks. Okay, Joshua chapter 9. What's happened in Joshua chapter 8? What's happened in what do we determine in Joshua chapter 8? Israel made a mistake, didn't they? All right, they made a mistake in they allowed sin to come into the camp. Of course, sin presented itself. They were not aware of it, but sin was in the camp, and God insisted that sin be purged from the camp, didn't He? Okay, so they brought all the tribes, they brought all the families, they brought all the men, and it landed on Achan. Achan was responsible for the sin. He took of the accursed things. He brought them in. He hid them under his tent. God said, "You got to purge the evil," right? We revealed that's a lesson to us today, right? We have to purge the evil. Now, when someone sins in the church, we don't drag them outside of the camp and stone them to death and pile a big great pile of stones over them, do we? Thank goodness, right? How many? It'd be piles of stones all over the United States, right? If we started, that's what we did to purge evil. But we are supposed to purge the evil, aren't we? Supposed to purge out the leaven. Little leaven leaveneth the whole lump. So when sin is allowed to fester in the church, what does it do? It creates problems, right? All right, so while the sin, of course, in the church doesn't oftentimes lead to death of members of the Lord's church, it can lead to spiritual death. And that's a lesson, that's a very pointed lesson we have to learn, that sin has far-reaching consequences, doesn't it? And you think about the kind of sin that's been committed, that sin has far-reaching consequences. And sometimes we think, well, this is a personal thing. You hear people say this, I'm not hurting anybody but me. This is mine. I'm doing this. I'm not hurting anybody else. Are you? You are, aren't you? It does, doesn't it? We've heard of the ripple effect, right? You drop a little pebble into a fairly decent sized body of water. You drop a small thing. Those ripples continue out. Now they get smaller and smaller and less and less and less and less. But those ripple effects continue on. And you think about the sin that we commit, the evil that's committed in this world, and those things have ripple effects, and they go outward and outward and outward. Now, when that pebble, so to speak, of Achan stealing that stuff, what were the immediate effects? The immediate effects. Men died, didn't they? Men died. They were defeated in a battle that they should have won. It should have been one of those things where everybody sort of stands around fighting with one hand behind their back. God had already delivered it to them, but what did they do? The sin caused them to lose the battle, and in doing so, families lost their husbands and their fathers and their sons, and it was a bad thing. And then the gradual effect, what? People started to question. What happened? God said that He was with us. What happened? So all of a sudden, people's faith begins to be shaken. And then the last effects were, of course, Achan and his family losing their lives, as well as the children of Israel having to partake in the killing of one of their own families. So all of that, it started continuing out and continuing out and continuing out. Okay, we look through the sin of the divided kingdom. Some of the sins that were committed at the very beginning. Solomon committed sin, and that sin rippled into the coming of the divided kingdom. And then the divided kingdom, the sin of the north, what was the immediate effect, of course, was that people were worshiping something other than God. What were the final effects? They were carried away, weren't they? The nations were destroyed. So we can't sit there and say, well, my sin really doesn't hurt anybody but me. I'm the only one affected. It's a victimless crime. Well, there's no real victimless crime. There's always going to be consequences. Yep. Absolutely it does.
Oh, that's a congregation got people living together. Oh, you can't have that.
Nope. And that's one of those things where, the idea of you glory in the crime, the idea of glory in the sin, it's almost where there's a certain sense of pride to it, and that's not to be. God's name is defamed. All right, God's name, and we think about the city of Ai and the king. After they set the Israelites to rout, what did they do? They went back and they laughed. They said, "That's all they've got? That this great God of theirs, this is all they could muster?" Now, of course, that we find in chapter 8 that they they proceeded to go back and utterly destroy Ai, and were able to loot them the first time God's allowed them to loot inside Canaan. But for the brief period of time, God's name was brought to shame by their sin. Okay, so they purged the sin, though. This is the great thing. There is no wrong time to do the right thing. So they did exactly as they were told to do. This is what you do. That's what they did. They purged the sin. And then in chapter 9, we see where God said, "Now, see, I have given the city into your hand." He tells them what to do, and they go and they engage in a little bit of deception for the city. They act like they're running away, and as soon as the men of Ai come out to pursue them, the other force rallies around. They go inside of the city, and they lock the gates. They set it afire. They begin to burn it to the ground. They begin to slaughter the inhabitants as God told them to do. And then, of course, the men from Ai turn around. They see the smoke. They say, "Oh no!" So they start going backwards. And then pretty soon they've got them in the circle. And at that point, it's all over but the screaming, and that's exactly what happened. They did exactly as God told them to do. And when we do exactly as God tells us to do, things are going to work out, don't they? And this is an interesting thing. They may not work out exactly the way we think they should, but they're going to work out the way that God wants them to, which is the more important thing, right? My desire for things happening, it may not be God's desire, but I really would rather God's desire be fulfilled than mine, because He's smarter than I am. His pay grade is way above mine, so I'm kind of, I lean more towards His pleasure than mine. All right, so we go all this thing. I kind of want to go back to this one portion. I want to go. Hang on a second. I was reading, and I kind of somebody read for me Joshua chapter 7 and verse 6. Joshua 7 and verse 6. Just hold your place at 9, but then go back to Joshua chapter 7 and verse 6. Actually, 6 and 7. Okay. So this is kind of an interesting, because when the scriptures see fit to give us this is a little vignette. Okay, it says that Joshua tears his clothes and he lays before he's laying before the ark of the covenant. He's laying before the ark of the Lord, and this is as close in his mind and his knowledge. This is as close as he can get to God. Okay, so he wants to go. I always wondered why people wanted to come into the auditorium. We used to get that all the time. People would knock on the door and say, "I just feel like I need to pray. Can I go into your sanctuary and pray?" And we're like, "Certainly, I don't mind you going in." So we'd let them come in there. They go where they feel they are closest to God, so that they can talk to God in the way that they feel they should. So this is what Joshua is doing. He goes and he falls before the ark of the Lord, and he tears his clothes and he lays there. And it's interesting in verse 7, it says he questions aloud. And I want to make sure that we understand this. It is okay. It is perfectly proper, it is perfectly fitting for us to question God. Okay? Now, what I mean by that, I do not mean rail against God. We have to be careful about this, but Joshua has a genuine, he's puzzled, he's befuddled by it. Remember, at this point, he doesn't know that there's sin in the camp. He has no idea why this is going on. He's not aware of it. So in his mind, he has some serious questions. Why? Why did you bring us all the way over? Now, see, he's not railing against God. He's not condemning God. Okay, he's not confronting God. He's questioning, why have you allowed this to happen? Why did you bring us over the Jordan River simply for this to happen? Why did you allow us to defeat the city of Jericho, but then you bring us and allow us to be defeated here? We would have been. Why couldn't we just be content and not have ever crossed over that Jordan? He didn't say go back into Egypt. No, never go back there. Never go all the way back. But just stay where we were if we're going to be brought over. So I want to make sure we understand that it's okay for us to question. There's plenty of questions in our minds. Sometimes our faith is shaken, and at this point, it sounds like Joshua's faith is a little shaken. It's not fallen. Okay, it's just shaken a little bit. He knows God has a plan, but why didn't you tell me? Why wasn't I made aware? And it's at this point that God lets him know that the reason that you were defeated was because of this. Sometimes we have to ask God, and God's going to answer us. Why is this happening? Why are you allowing this to happen? And then God reveals himself. God reveals his plan to us. Now, he doesn't whisper to us like he does Joshua. He doesn't come down and say, oh, by the way, I had this in mind. Sorry I didn't let you know, but no, that's not what happens. But he does reveal himself to us, right, through his word. Why is this happening? Why is this happening? And then what happens is we find out what God has in mind. God tells us. He wants us to know. He doesn't want us to be in the dark. He certainly didn't want Joshua to be in the dark. He lets him know, this is what's happened, and this is what you can do about it. Not only is this what's occurred, but this is what you do to overcome the obstacle that you found in your face. Okay, all right. So anyway, I just wanted to kind of go back and talk about that for just a second. All right. So chapter 9, Joshua 9. This is when we get into again. It's just another little event that happens in the Israelites' march through Canaan. So the things that have happened have become known to the inhabitants of the area, haven't they? I mean, things like that don't happen in the dark. They are people who are witnesses to it, people who have found out about it. They spread the news, and this is no exception. What's happened at Jericho, what's happened at Ai has become known to the inhabitants of the land. In chapter 9, verse 1, as soon as all the kings who were beyond the Jordan in the hill country and in the lowland all around the coast of the great sea towards Lebanon, the Hittites and the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites heard of this, they gathered together as one to fight against Joshua and Israel. All right? So they're going to do like most people would in a situation like this. If we come together, we're stronger than this army that's coming up against us. If we can join together, we can defeat them, or at least, if nothing else, fight them to a standstill and sue for peace. Okay, if nothing else, we might be able to stave off what's happening. But, not like this, I will give it to them. The inhabitants of Gibeon, man, these are some shrewd individuals, aren't they? All right, they are shrewd individuals. God tells us to be shrewd, doesn't he? He tells us, I want you to be shrewd. All right? Think about what's happening and see what you can do to work within the parameters that's been set. The inhabitants of Gibeon know. They've heard the news, and they realize that no matter, and this was a great nation. This is a nation of warriors, the inhabitants of Gibeon. But they knew what God had accomplished. And they knew that there was no way that they could stand before the nation of Israel. So what do? Well, when the inhabitants of Gibeon heard what Joshua had done to Jericho and to Ai, they on their part acted with cunning and went and made ready provisions and took worn-out sacks for their donkeys and wineskins, worn out and torn and mended with worn-out patched sandals on their feet and worn-out clothes. And all their provisions were dry and crumbly. And they went to Joshua in the camp at Gilgal and said to him and the men of Israel, we have come from a distant country. Now, is that true? No, they were right down the road. But they acted with cunning. So when they walked in, they looked as if they had been on a long journey. Because look at what he says. We have come from a distant country, so now make a covenant with us. But the men of Israel said to the Hivites, perhaps you live among us. In other words, maybe you live close by. How then can we make a covenant with you? Because God told them what? You are not to make a covenant with what? The inhabitants of the land, right? You don't make a covenant with them. What is their job with the inhabitants of the land? Cut them out. They're to excise them from the nation. Okay? You're to drive these people out from the land. Don't make a covenant with them. Because if you make a covenant with them, that means they're going to be allowed to live amongst you. And if they live amongst you, they are going to corrupt you. Okay? They're going to corrupt you. Do not make a covenant with them. Instead, you're to drive them from the land. All right? So they said, if you live among us, we can't do that. All right? We're going to do to you as God tells us to do to you. But what does he say? He says, perhaps you live among us. How then can we make a covenant with you? They said to Joshua, we are your servants. So they immediately assume a submissive position in this relationship. They say to Joshua, we are your servants. You know, we are not going to bring any harm to you, nor do they. They have no intention of harm because they realize if they stand against Joshua and the nation of Israel, there's no hope for them. They've seen what God can do. And Joshua said to them, who are you and where do you come from? They said to him, from a very distant country your servants have come because of the name of the Lord your God. Now this part of it is true. Not the distant country, but they have come because of who? God, Jehovah God. We have heard what he has done. For we have heard. Now listen, look at what they present. For we have heard a report of him and all that he did where? In Egypt. Man, how long ago has that been? I mean, it's been a long time since Egypt was brought to naught because of God's actions. But this is the report that they've heard. So this kind of lends credence to the story. You notice they don't say, we heard what he did in Jericho and we heard what he did in Ai. Why would that? That would have messed up their story, wouldn't it? You know, they wouldn't have heard about it that quickly unless they were close by. So they said, oh, we heard about what he did in Egypt and all that he did to the two kings of the Amorites who were beyond, before they crossed over the Jordan River. You know, they wreaked some destruction on the other side of the Jordan. So we've heard of the two kings across the Jordan, and we've heard what he did to the nation of Egypt. And the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon, the king of Heshbon, and to Og, the king of Bashan, who lived in Ashtaroth. So, after we heard all of these things, our elders and all the inhabitants of the land said to us, take provisions in your hand for the journey, and go to meet them and say to them, we are your servants, come now and make a covenant with us. Here is our bread. It was still warm when we took it from our houses as our food for the journey on the day we set out to come to you. But now, behold, it is dry and crumbly. These wineskins were new when we filled them, and behold, they have burst. And these garments and sandals of ours are worn out from the very long journey. This kind of, if you think about it, if you kind of read a little bit further into it, this kind of is counter to what happened with the children of Israel. Remember, what happened with the nation of Israel? Their sandals did not wear out. They never went hungry. They always had food. It was renewed every single day. Remember, they were taking manna up until they crossed over the River Jordan. Okay, so it's kind of like a direct contrast between how these people were taken care of versus how the children of Israel were taken care of. And the children of Israel had been on a much longer journey. They've been wandering around the wilderness. And now they've crossed over the Jordan, and their sandals are still new on their feet. Their food is fresh every day. These people have come right down the road. It's just kind of an interesting juxtaposition. Don't read too much into that. It says, so the men took of some of their provisions, but did not, here it is, verse 14. The men took some of their provisions, but what? What did they not do? They did. What? All right, so we see where the wheels fall off, right? This is where the wheels fall off the train. They did not ask counsel of God. Because if they had asked counsel of God, what would God have done? He would have told them the right thing to do, the correct thing to do. Not just the right one, but the correct one. This is what you do. Don't make a covenant with them. Well, he'd already told them that, but they were under the impression that these men are from a far country. And they were perfectly entitled to make a covenant with someone that they had not come in contact that was far away. They could do that, but not in the nation that they were going to inhabit. So they took some of their provisions, but they did not ask counsel from the Lord. It also shows us that God is not going to sit there and intervene in every single thing that we do, is He? If we set something in our minds, God is not going to reach out His hand and prevent us from, making a mistake, is He? He's not going to do that. When we think about, whoa, that would be so nice, would it? Would it? No. We'd basically be children for the rest of our lives. We'd be infants in the faith. If God just stopped us from doing anything that might cause harm to us or stopped us from sinning, He wouldn't be a God of free choice, would He? At that point, we're prisoners. We're puppets. There's nothing we can do about that. But anyway, he says, did not ask counsel from the Lord. And in verse 15, this is their mistake. This is where they make a mistake. Joshua made peace with them and made a covenant with them to let them live, and the leaders of the congregation swore to them. All right. So here's a mistake that they made when they didn't ask counsel of the Lord. It's the same mistake we make all the time. We make a figurative covenant with a lot of things when we don't ask counsel from the Lord, don't we? You know, and many times it's to our everlasting regret. All right. How many times have you seen people who marry badly, really badly, because they didn't seek counsel from God? You know, what does God have to say about this? They take a job and they didn't ask counsel from God. They get involved in a business arrangement and didn't ask counsel from God. And what we've done is essentially we've made a covenant with something where if we had simply went to God's counsel, God could have told us right off the bat, hey, don't do that. This is unwise. Okay, don't do that. The idea of being yoked unequally. You know, so many people have taken that to mean marriage. That's not what marriage is. When he says being not unequally yoked with unbelievers, that's not talking about the marriage relationship. Okay, that's talking about entering into a venture with someone who is not a Christian. Say, for example, you decide that you're going to you're going to open up a car wash. Okay, and you go in with a guy that you've known maybe from high school. We're going to open up a car wash together. All right. He brings a little bit more money to the table, so he has a little bit more say-so. So he's got a 60-40 split with him having the higher share. And he comes in, he says, you know, I think there's some ways that we can really increase our business. And they're like, well, okay. Well, what are you thinking? He says, you know, I've seen these places where in order to entice people, especially guys, to come in off the street and get their car washed, we have a bunch of young ladies out there with bikinis on. And they'll dance with signs, and if you want to hand wash, they'll hand wash your car in a swimsuit. And of course, you know, in your mind, you're just horrified. It's like, no, we can't do that. And he said, well, I own a bigger share of the business. So guess what we're going to do? And guess what? You're there. That's where you are. And now you find yourself wrapped into something that you of course would, as a God-fearing Christian, would say, this isn't right. I don't feel comfortable with this at all. I wouldn't want to be a part of this, but now you are. Don't be unequally yoked with unbelievers, because what happens is when you're unequally yoked, what happens? You can get pulled into a position that you had no idea you were going to be in. And there you are. Okay? So, anyway, they've made an unequal covenant with people. All right? So look what happens. In verse 16, at the end of 3 days after they had made this covenant with them, they heard that they were their neighbors. So in other words, they lived right up the road, so to speak, and that they lived among them. And the people of Israel set out and reached their cities on the third day. So they did a little bit of research, but they did a little bit of research a little too late. You know, once you made a covenant, and this was part of it, you don't go back on a covenant. They made a covenant before God. You can't go back on that. They should have done a little bit of research, should have consulted with God in the first place. So they reached their cities on the third day, so they were a 3-day journey away. And they thought they'd come from this far, far, far place. Now their cities were Gibeon, Kephirah, Beeroth, and Kiriath Jearim. But the people of Israel did not attack them because the leaders of the congregation had sworn to them by the Lord. And all the congregation murmured against the leaders. Why did they do this? Why did the congregation, the nation of Israel, murmur against the leaders? Yeah, they'd gone against God. They made a mistake. Now they've got these people that are 3 days away, who are the unwashed heathen of this land, and they're going to be allowed to live. You know, at this point, they're determined to purge the land, and now, well, they're here, and there's nothing we can do about it. This covenant is set in stone, and we have to abide by it. We swore to them. All right. So Joshua hang on a second. Verse 19. But all the leaders said to all the congregation, we have sworn to them by the Lord, the God of Israel, and now we may not touch them. This we will do to them. Let them live, lest wrath be brought upon us because of the oath that we swore to them. And the leaders said to them, let them live. But they became cutters of wood and drawers of water for all of the congregation, just as the leaders had said of them. So they were pretty shrewd, didn't they? They went from a nation that was certain to be destroyed. Okay? the Gibeonites were going to be destroyed. Their destruction was certain. However, they were smart. They made a covenant, and now, not only will they not be killed, but Israel is going to protect them. They have to make some compromises, though. What? What are their compromises? What are they now? Instead of a nation of warriors that they used to be, now what are they? They're servants. They draw wood and they carry water. And this is what they're going to do for Israel. And so when you make a covenant, sometimes you have to compromise, don't you? And this is exactly what's happened. So verse 22, Joshua summoned them and said, "Why did you deceive us, saying we are very far from you when you dwell among us?" Well, it's kind of a... Joshua should know why they did that. Why would they do that? Now, therefore, you are cursed, and some of you shall never be anything but servants, cutters of wood and drawers of water for the house of my God. And they answered, and they said, because it was told to your servants for certainty that the Lord your God had commanded his servants Moses to give you all the land and destroy all of the inhabitants of the land from before you. So we did what? What did we do? Verse 24, the very last part of it. So we did what? We feared greatly for our lives because of you and did this thing. These were not stupid people. Man, this is smart. I hope to think that maybe I would be that smart if I lived back then and I was confronted with something like the God of Israel, that I would be smart enough to make this sort of a thing, make this sort of a covenant. We did it because we're scared. You were going to destroy us because your God told Moses to destroy us. So we did this thing. In verse 25, and now behold, we are in your hand. Whatever seems good and right in your sight to do to us, do it. But you can't kill us. So he did this to them and delivered them out of the hand of the people of Israel, and they did not kill them. But Joshua made them that day cutters of wood and drawers of water for the congregation and for the altar of the Lord to this day in the place that he should choose. So, when you think about it, this was something that was, a full-time thing. Remember what the altar of the Lord required. Constant sacrifice, constant burnt sacrifice. So these people were kept pretty busy, right? Bringing wood and bringing water for the altar of the Lord. So it's interesting that he took this pagan, idolatrous group of people, and he essentially made them servants of God. He didn't say that they couldn't worship their God, but guess what you're going to do? You're going to serve my God. You may worship yours, but you're going to serve my God. So he really humbled them. He humiliated them at their own choosing because they chose that rather than death. Makes perfect sense. All right. Let's see. I want to look at this. Hold on a second. Give me just 1 second. I was looking for, there was another case in, I'm trying to, it's further down. It's later on in Joshua, but basically the Gibeonites are attacked and the Israelites actually come to their protection. So we're going to get to it eventually, so I'm not going to worry about it right now. So we'll stop there. Anybody got any questions about chapter 9? Some good lessons, though, right? For one thing, appearances can be deceiving, can't they? Yeah. And we have to be careful. But it also tells us that while appearances can be deceiving, should appearances be all we go by? No. All right. We look a little bit deeper. You think had they gone to the counsel of the Lord, he would have told them. Had they just done a little bit of basic research, they could have figured it out. Send out some scouts. Try to find out where these people come from. You saw where they were coming from. Go that direction. How far are they? 3 days. Okay, we can't make a covenant with you. All right, we're going to destroy you. All right, so that was one of the things. How does Satan disguise himself? Not physically disguise himself, but what does he disguise himself as? Yeah, right. So something that we wouldn't suspect. Why would we have any suspicion about someone who comes to us, say into the Lord's assembly, and they present themselves as what we would consider to be an angel of light. In other words, a messenger from God, someone who speaks of the Word of God. Why would we suspect anybody like that? But how many times have the doors of the Lord's assembly been opened up to people who would come in and seek to deceive the people? Time and time and time and time again. And unfortunately, many times what we do is we receive these people because of that. We give them basically an open mic. You say whatever you want. And I know that this is the case. I've seen it happen time and time again, where the Lord's people have been delivered false doctrine. I mean, lies, and because they are coming from someone who presents themselves as something that they are not. So the idea of appearances can be deceiving. At the end of the day, it did not harm the Israelites at this particular point in time, but they weren't able to accomplish what they were told to accomplish, did they? Yeah. Yeah. It could have presented itself like it did last time. Fortunately, the Gibeonites were not, their concern was more with saving their own skins than it was with any kind of desire to inflict harm. We just don't want to die. So listen, we're your servants. Do whatever you want. We just don't want to die. You wonder about how many of the... One thing, they saw the power of the Lord, and they realized what He was capable of doing. All right, they saw that He was able to destroy them utterly, and they realized that. They accepted that, and in doing so, they realized that in order for us to continue to remain alive, in order for the Lord to allow us to remain alive, we're going to have to do something. So they went into a covenant, and this covenant would be more along the lines of a vassal. The idea of we will continue to remain among you, but we are completely subservient to you. Whatever as they said, told Joshua, whatever you see fit, that's what we'll do. Whatever you see fit to do, we've given ourselves over into your hand. And a part of that may be the reliance on Joshua being an honorable, decent man, and he was. He said, okay, all right, but this is what you're going to do from now on. So while he accepts their humility, he puts them to work. He puts them to work into the service of Jehovah, which is kind of an ironic thing. This God that would have had them destroyed is now going to be served by them because they're going to cut wood and they're going to draw water. Two of the things that probably the least enviable of jobs is that's what they're going to do for the rest of their lives. All right, well, we'll stop there.